The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the city park, where children's laughter echoed across the open fields and birds flitted from tree to tree, singing their cheerful songs. Families were scattered across the grass, some sitting on picnic blankets with baskets of food, while others tossed frisbees or played catch, their cheerful voices mixed with the soft hum of joggers' footsteps along the winding paths, creating a peaceful, everyday rhythm that seemed to belong to everyone and no one at the same time. Amid this ordinary park scene walked a woman who, at first glance, could have been mistaken for just another visitor enjoying the sunshine. She moved slowly but confidently, each step measured, her posture straight and calm, and there was something about the way she held herself that suggested she carried a lifetime of experiences behind her eyes. She was an African-American veteran, a woman whose life had been shaped by discipline, courage, and countless untold stories, and though her uniform was long behind her, the aura of respect she commanded remained unmistakable. The veteran wore a simple jacket and comfortable shoes, nothing flashy or attention-seeking, yet there was a quiet strength in her presence that made people instinctively give her a little more space, as if they could feel her history without needing to know the details. Around her, the park seemed to move in slow motion, as if the world had paused just for her, though no one else realized it. On a nearby bench, an elderly couple fed the pigeons, chuckling softly when one daring bird pecked at the crumbs from their hands. A group of teenagers skated along the concrete path, laughing as they narrowly avoided a collision, and a young mother chased her toddler, whose tiny legs moved faster than she expected. The scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers mingled in the air, giving the entire scene a light, almost magical feeling, as if the park itself were alive and breathing. The veteran walked past all of this with a thoughtful expression, her eyes scanning the surroundings, not in suspicion, but in quiet awareness. She noticed the little details, the way a squirrel paused to nibble on an acorn, the flutter of a dog's ears as it chased a ball, the gentle ripple of sunlight through the branches above. Each small moment seemed to matter to her, as if she understood the fragility of these simple pleasures in a way that most people never did. People passed her without a second thought, some nodding politely, others barely noticing her at all, and she accepted this anonymity with ease, knowing she didn't need recognition to be important. Her mind, however, carried memories of places far from this peaceful park, of nights under foreign skies, of missions that demanded courage and resilience she could never fully explain. Those memories made her even more grounded in the present, appreciating the calm, ordinary beauty of a sunny afternoon. As she continued walking, a soft breeze brushed past her, ruffling her hair and carrying with it the mixed sounds of life in the park, children's giggles, the distant bark of a dog, and the occasional honk of a car from the nearby street blended together in a melody of normalcy. It was the kind of day that promised nothing unusual, the kind of day where everyone assumed they were safe from surprises. Yet the veteran's calm steps and composed expression hinted that she had faced far more than anyone in the park could imagine. Little did anyone know that this peaceful scene, so full of laughter and sunlight, was about to become the backdrop for a tense, unforgettable encounter, one that would challenge assumptions, reveal hidden courage, and leave everyone watching forever changed. The veteran's presence was quiet but commanding, like the calm before a storm, and though the park seemed ordinary, the air carried a subtle tension, a sense that something significant was about to unfold. As she neared a small fountain at the heart of the park, where water splashed gently against the stone and a few birds hopped along the edges, the veteran slowed her pace, taking in the scene around her with careful eyes. She noticed the expressions of passers-by, some smiling absent-mindedly, some deep in thought, unaware that history and heroism could be walking among them unnoticed. In that moment, she seemed to embody both the ordinariness of daily life and the extraordinary life she had lived, a living reminder that bravery and resilience often go unseen. And so the stage was quietly set, with the warm sun, the laughter, the rustling leaves, and a veteran walking through it all with quiet dignity. No one could predict what would happen next, yet every detail, the light, the sounds, the presence of people, and the calm strength of the veteran, built a tension that made the park feel alive, as if the world itself were holding its breath, waiting for the story to unfold. As the veteran approached a small, tree-lined path in the park, she noticed two police officers walking briskly toward her, their uniforms crisp, their expressions serious, and the way they moved suggested they were looking for trouble rather than simply enjoying the day. At first, she thought they might just pass by, another pair of officials doing their routine rounds, but there was something in the way they focused on her that made her pause. A subtle shift in their posture, a quick glance exchanged between them that spoke of assumptions being made before a word was said. The veteran stopped, her hands relaxed at her sides, her eyes calm yet sharp, observing the officers with the same awareness she used in every mission she had ever undertaken. She noticed the small details, the way one of them fidgeted with his belt, the tension in the shoulders of the other, the faint crease in their brows as they approached, signs that, despite their authority, they were unsure of how to handle her presence. "Excuse me, ma'am," the taller officer began, his voice firm, but not overly loud. "What are you doing here? This park has rules, and you need to." He hesitated, glancing at his partner as if looking for backup, perhaps expecting agreement, but the veteran's calm, steady gaze stopped him mid-sentence. She smiled slightly, polite but unyielding, and said, "I'm just enjoying the park, like anyone else." Her voice was even, soft, but carried a quiet strength, the kind of tone that made people think twice before challenging her further. The second officer stepped forward, his hands brushing the edges of his belt nervously. "Well, there have been complaints about suspicious people in this area, and we need to." He, too, faltered under her steady stare, suddenly aware that he was speaking to someone who radiated more authority than they expected. Passers-by began to notice the interaction, slowing down, whispering to each other, their curiosity piqued by the tension in the air. The veteran didn't raise her voice or show anger, yet the mere presence of her calm composure seemed to amplify the awkwardness of the situation. Her posture was straight, her movements deliberate, as if she were in full control of every moment, while the officers struggled to maintain their dominance. The taller officer cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Do you live around here?" he asked, the words coming out more like a question than a statement, as if he were testing the waters. "Yes," she replied simply, "I've lived here for a while." The answer was ordinary, but delivered with a confidence that made it impossible to dismiss her. At this point, one of the children playing nearby accidentally kicked a soccer ball into the path, causing a brief distraction, and the veteran instinctively stepped aside, her reflexes quick and precise, another subtle reminder of the discipline she carried with her. Even the officers noticed, a flicker of respect crossing their faces, though they quickly masked it with professional formality. The tension hung in the air like a storm cloud, thick and heavy, as the officers continued their questioning, now trying to assert authority over someone who refused to be intimidated. Their words came faster, a little sharper, betraying the frustration of encountering someone they couldn't easily categorize or control. "Do you have any ID on you?" the taller officer demanded, leaning slightly forward, his tone shifting from polite inquiry to thinly veiled challenge. The veteran reached into her bag slowly, deliberately, and produced her identification, handing it over with a calm smile. Her movements were precise, unhurried, every gesture controlled, as if she were performing a drill she had repeated countless times in her military career. As the officers examined the ID, their expressions softened slightly, though the tension remained, the air thick with unspoken judgments and assumptions. The veteran stood quietly, letting them process the information, her eyes scanning the park once more, aware of the growing crowd of onlookers who were now silently watching, waiting, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. It was in that brief pause, a moment when everything seemed suspended, that the story took its first turn toward the unexpected. The veteran's calm and dignified presence had already begun to shift the balance of power in the encounter, yet no one knew just how dramatically the situation was about to change. And in the quiet, almost imperceptible moment before the officers looked closer, there was a sense that the park, once ordinary and peaceful, had become a stage for something remarkable, something that would leave everyone watching stunned, curious, and utterly captivated. The crowd around the park path had grown slightly, drawn by the officers' sharp voices and the veteran's calm presence. People whispered to each other, some curious, some skeptical. As the tension between the three adults began to rise, the veteran remained composed, her posture straight, her gaze steady, but the officers, caught between authority and uncertainty, started to lose the careful balance they had tried to maintain. "Ma'am, you need to step aside," the taller officer said, his voice louder now, carrying an edge of impatience. The veteran didn't move immediately, choosing instead to study him carefully, her calm demeanor making his frustration more visible. "You can't just embarrass people in public like this," a passerby muttered under their breath. The words carried to the ears of those watching. The veteran felt the energy shift subtly, the crowd noticing the tension and reacting in small murmurs of concern. Their eyes followed every movement, silently rooting for the woman who refused to shrink under scrutiny. The taller officer leaned forward, pointing slightly toward a nearby bench. "I'm asking you again, step over there." His tone, meant to assert authority, instead made him look nervous, desperate to control someone who refused to react the way he expected. The veteran, unflinching, shook her head gently. "I'm not causing trouble," she said, her voice soft yet firm, carrying the quiet power of someone who had faced real danger and knew that calm was more effective than aggression. She let her words hang in the air, and for a moment, the park seemed to fall silent, as if waiting to see what would happen next. The officers exchanged a quick glance, a flicker of doubt passing between them, but they continued, trying to regain the upper hand. Their words became sharper, their posture more rigid, and in the process, they drew more attention from onlookers, who began taking out phones to record the incident, sensing that this encounter was far from ordinary. "Do you understand the rules here?" the second officer demanded, his voice trembling slightly despite his attempts at authority. The veteran met his gaze calmly, her expression unreadable, and responded, "Yes, I understand perfectly." It was then that the first signs of embarrassment began to creep onto the officers' faces, though neither would admit it aloud. Their polite firmness wavered as the veteran continued to answer every question without flinching, without raising her voice, and without giving them a reason to escalate. Every question they asked, every command they gave, was met with dignity, forcing them to confront the uncomfortable reality that they were making assumptions about her, assumptions that were wrong. Passers-by murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads at the officer's behavior, others whispering encouragement to the veteran. The energy of the crowd shifted subtly, moving from casual curiosity to silent support, and the officers, feeling the eyes of multiple witnesses on them, grew even more awkward, realizing that their actions were being judged, recorded, and shared in real time. The veteran's calm defiance seemed to magnify the officer's missteps, and the humiliation became almost tangible. A man walking his dog stopped and muttered, "You don't treat people like that," while a teenage girl filming the incident whispered, "She's not even scared." The veteran's quiet strength highlighted the officer's mistakes in a way that no words could have done. As the minutes stretched, the tension thickened, turning the once peaceful park into a stage for a dramatic display of power, pride, and misjudgment. The veteran stood her ground, the embodiment of dignity, while the officers, frustrated and flustered, became the ones on display, their authority undermined not by violence or defiance, but by quiet composure, patience, and an unshakable sense of self. And in that moment, the crowd began to realize that this was not just a simple misunderstanding, but a lesson unfolding in real time, one that everyone present, from joggers to parents to children playing nearby, would remember for a long time, as the veteran's courage and poise transformed what could have been a humiliating moment into an unforgettable display of strength, grace, and integrity. Even as the officers' voices grew sharper and their gestures more commanding, the veteran remained perfectly composed, her eyes steady, her hands relaxed at her sides. There was a quiet confidence in the way she held herself, a calm that seemed almost unnatural in the tension of the moment. Passers-by noticed it immediately, some whispering to each other, "She's not scared," while others simply stared, captivated by the rare sight of someone who refused to be rattled. The taller officer took a step closer, trying once again to assert control. "Ma'am, you need to answer us clearly, or we'll have to take action," he said, his tone losing some of its earlier authority as doubt crept in. The veteran tilted her head slightly, observing him with the kind of focus that suggested she could see through every doubt, every assumption, every hidden thought he had. "I am answering," she said softly, her voice calm and steady. "I am right here, speaking to you, following the law, and respecting everyone around me." Her words were ordinary, yet they carried a weight far beyond what anyone in the park could immediately understand. They were the words of someone who had faced danger, injustice, and chaos far greater than a tense afternoon in a park, and who knew that calm resolve was more powerful than aggression. The officers, however, were not used to being met with such unshakable composure, and their frustration began to show. Their faces tightened, their hands fidgeted, and their eyes darted around, looking for backup or guidance, anything that might restore the illusion of control they had so confidently believed in at the start. Meanwhile, the crowd of onlookers grew larger, their curiosity shifting into silent admiration, sensing the tension but also sensing who truly held the power in the moment. One of the children who had been watching from a safe distance tugged at their parent's hand, whispering, "She's not scared at all," and the parent nodded, sharing a knowing smile with another observer. The veteran's calmness had become infectious, creating a ripple through the crowd. Everyone watching could feel it, the strength that came not from shouting, not from force, but from quiet dignity and inner confidence. The veteran spoke again, this time addressing both officers together. "I understand your duty, and I respect it," she said, her voice soft but firm, "but I am not a threat. I am a citizen, a veteran, and I am simply enjoying this park, just as everyone else here is." Her words were simple, yet precise, delivered with such clarity that they left no room for argument. Her calm logic cut through the tension like a knife, exposing the assumptions and biases that had guided the officers' behavior up to this point. The officers exchanged another glance, this time longer, as if they were beginning to realize that the woman standing before them was not just another person to control or question, she was someone whose life experience and discipline demanded respect, whether they were willing to admit it or not, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed their faces, the certainty of authority beginning to waver. Passers-by began murmuring among themselves, some whispering praise, others shaking their heads at the officer's behavior. The energy in the park shifted, the earlier tension giving way to a sense of justice, or at least recognition that something remarkable was happening right in front of them. The veteran's calm had not only preserved her dignity but had subtly shifted the balance of power in the encounter. For a moment, the park felt almost suspended in time, as if holding its breath, watching the unfolding drama, waiting for the officer's next move. The veteran's serene presence created a contrast so stark that even casual onlookers could sense the lesson being taught. Without a single raised voice, without a single act of defiance, she had taken control of the moment. And the embarrassment the officers had started to create now hovered just beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. And as she stood there, quietly explaining, calmly responding, the crowd realized that they were witnessing something extraordinary, not just a confrontation, but a display of courage, patience, and quiet power, the kind of strength that doesn't scream for attention but commands it effortlessly. Just as the tension in the park seemed to reach its peak, something subtle yet powerful happened. The veteran slowly lifted her left hand, just enough for the sunlight to catch it, and at that moment, the crowd, already holding its collective breath, noticed something extraordinary. There, glinting in the afternoon sun, was a symbol of her service, a medal, a tattoo, or a ring that told a story far greater than anyone had imagined. The taller officer's eyes widened first, the sharp lines of his face softening into disbelief. He leaned slightly closer, squinting to see more clearly, as if the tiny emblem on her hand could undo all the assumptions he had made. The second officer's jaw tightened, his hand unconsciously brushing against his belt, but this time it was not authority that guided him, it was shock, recognition, and, suddenly, respect. The crowd gasped quietly, some whispering to each other, "She's a veteran," or "Look at that," and the murmurs spread quickly. Like wildfire, each person in the park began to realize that the woman standing there, who had calmly faced their authority and maintained her dignity, had lived a life of service and courage far beyond what anyone could have guessed. The veteran didn't speak immediately, letting the moment linger, letting the officers and the crowd take in what they saw. The medal or symbol on her hand was not just an ornament, it was a story of sacrifice, bravery, and honor, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that courage often walks quietly among us, unnoticed until it is revealed. The officer's body language shifted noticeably, their earlier aggression melting into hesitation. Then came the first small acknowledgement, a subtle nod from the taller officer, his voice slightly softer. "Didn't realize," he said, the words barely audible, but carrying weight. The second officer looked at her hand again, then down at himself, perhaps realizing the mistake they had made in judging her. Passers-by began whispering even more fervently, recording the moment on their phones, capturing not just the revelation, but the profound shift in the energy of the park. Some children tugged at their parents' sleeves, pointing excitedly, sensing that something important was happening, even if they didn't fully understand it. The veteran finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I've served my country, and I've faced far greater challenges than this moment," she said. "I understand your duty, and I respect it, but please remember to respect others as well." Her words resonated through the small crowd, echoing with a mix of authority, dignity, and quiet power. The taller officer swallowed hard, his eyes briefly meeting hers, and in that silent glance, he seemed to recognize not only her past but the humility and grace with which she carried it. His earlier attempts at control now felt misplaced, unnecessary, almost foolish, and he shifted slightly, unsure of what to say next. Even the onlookers could feel the change, the air around the small gathering lighter, filled with admiration and a sense of justice restored. The veteran's quiet courage had flipped the scene entirely, turning what began as public embarrassment into a moment of awe, reflection, and inspiration. Some of the crowd began clapping softly, not to mock the officers, but to honor the veteran, acknowledging her strength and resilience. The officers, now fully aware of the impact of their assumptions, stepped back, their posture humbled, their faces marked by the realization that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned and recognized. In that instant, the park transformed, not physically, but emotionally, from a simple gathering of people enjoying the afternoon into a place where lessons about courage, dignity, and perception were being taught in real time. Everyone present would remember the way a single hand, calm composure, and a small emblem could reveal a lifetime of service and command respect without a word of anger. And as the veteran lowered her hand, letting the sun's reflection fade, the officers and crowd alike were left with the undeniable truth. Bravery is often quiet, strength is often invisible, and assumptions, however confident, can be shattered in a single revealing moment. The moment had passed, yet the shock lingered in the park like a heavy fog. The officers stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the veteran's hand for the last glint of proof, as if they could somehow replay their assumptions and take them back. But the truth was undeniable, and for the first time in this encounter, they were forced to confront the weight of their mistake. The taller officer swallowed hard, his throat tight, and his shoulders slumped slightly, as if the invisible burden of embarrassment had suddenly landed on him. He had approached the veteran with authority, certain of his position, and yet now he realized that authority meant nothing when faced with someone whose courage and life experience far surpassed his own. The second officer shifted uneasily, glancing around at the crowd, aware that everyone present had seen exactly what had just unfolded. Their whispers, their quiet gasps, even their smiles, were a mirror reflecting the officer's misjudgment. The veteran remained calm, standing with dignity, her eyes scanning the officers and the small crowd, understanding that the power of the moment was not just in her revelation but in the lesson it delivered. It was not anger that she carried, but quiet pride and patience, and that made the officer's mistake even more glaring. One by one, the onlookers began to whisper among themselves, commenting on the bravery of the veteran and the irony of the officer's behavior. She didn't raise her voice once, one woman said, shaking her head, and yet they look like they've lost all control. Another added, their words traveled through the crowd, amplifying the officer's realization that they had been publicly humbled. The veteran's calm had done more than reveal her service, it had exposed assumptions, bias, and the arrogance that can come with authority. The officer's initial confidence had dissolved under the weight of undeniable proof, and they now faced the uncomfortable truth that they had misjudged someone based on appearance alone, and not on facts. The taller officer finally spoke, his voice quieter, uncertain. I see now, he said slowly, as if tasting the words before releasing them. His partner nodded, not trusting himself to speak immediately. Their eyes met the veteran's, and in that silent exchange, they seemed to acknowledge her experience, her service, and the dignity with which she carried it. The crowd noticed the change instantly, sensing that the officer's pride had been replaced with humility. A few people began clapping softly, not to mock, but to honor the veteran, and the officers, realizing they were being observed so closely, gave tentative nods of acknowledgement, an unspoken apology in their posture, if not in words. It was not just the officers who were affected, the entire park seemed to shift. People who had been casual observers now felt a deeper respect for the veteran, and a quiet reflection on how quickly judgment can be passed. The children playing nearby paused for a moment, watching silently, unknowingly learning a lesson about courage, dignity, and the power of calm. Even the veteran seemed aware of the impact of the moment, though she said nothing, allowing the realization to settle naturally, letting the officers and the crowd process the truth in their own way. Her silence was deliberate, a demonstration that power and respect do not require argument or loudness, but presence, poise, and integrity. The taller officer adjusted his cap nervously, then looked at his partner, a shared understanding passing between them without words. They had been wrong, and now they knew it, and that knowledge weighed on them far more heavily than any public reprimand could have. The realization was almost physical, a tightening in their chests, a flush on their faces, a humbling moment they would carry long after they left the park. The crowd began to murmur in admiration, some pointing to the veteran, some nodding to each other, recognizing that what they had just witnessed was not just a confrontation, but a teaching moment, a living example of courage, resilience, and quiet power. And in that mixture of awe and reflection, the officers themselves seemed to grow slightly smaller, their authority humbled by the presence of someone who had faced far greater trials. And so, the shock turned into understanding, and the embarrassment into a lesson, as the veteran's calm, dignified response forced everyone present to confront their assumptions, reconsider their judgments, and see the truth in a new light. The park, once ordinary and peaceful, had become a stage for a story that would be remembered long after the afternoon sun dipped behind the trees. After the initial shock of the revelation had passed, the park seemed to settle into a quieter, more thoughtful atmosphere. The crowd lingered, their eyes still on the veteran, yet their expressions had softened into curiosity and admiration rather than suspicion. People whispered to each other, sharing their own reflections on what had just unfolded, realizing that what they had witnessed was more than a tense encounter. It was a lesson about judgment, dignity, and the power of restraint. The officers stood slightly apart, their earlier confidence replaced by a cautious humility. The taller officer rubbed the back of his neck nervously, occasionally glancing at the veteran, while the second officer adjusted his cap, his shoulders still stiff but less rigid than before. Both of them were silent, the weight of understanding pressing down on them, as they processed the realization that authority alone does not guarantee respect, and that assumptions, however confident, can be dangerously misleading. The veteran, sensing the shift in the energy around her, remained calm, her posture relaxed but poised. Her eyes scanned the park, noting the conversations, the whispers, and the small gestures of acknowledgement. She didn't need anyone to praise her or apologize. The moment itself, the lesson it carried, was enough, and her quiet dignity had already spoken louder than any words could. Nearby, a young woman spoke softly to her friend. She handled that so well, without yelling, without fighting back. "I think that's true courage," her friend nodded, her eyes wide with admiration. "And look at the officers. I think they actually learned something today." Across the park, a man who had been recording the scene uploaded the video to social media, captioning it with words about bravery, respect, and the lessons in human behavior. The story was already spreading, inspiring others beyond the park, far beyond the reach of that afternoon. The children playing near the fountain paused, their attention caught by the gravity of the adults' reactions. Some tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking questions in their innocent voices. Why were the officers mean to her? And, why is everyone looking at her? The parents, unsure of how to answer fully, smiled and said, "She's very brave," leaving the lesson of courage and dignity to settle naturally in the minds of the youngest witnesses. The veteran finally spoke again, her voice calm and steady. "We all have a choice," she said, "to judge or to understand, to assume or to learn. Each moment is an opportunity to see the truth, to recognize strength, and to respect it." Her words, simple yet profound, carried across the park, weaving into the consciousness of everyone present, reinforcing the lesson that had quietly unfolded. The officers listened, their faces thoughtful, absorbing the meaning behind her words, realizing that their assumptions had caused unnecessary tension, embarrassment, and discomfort. It was a humbling experience, one that challenged them to reflect on how they approach people in everyday life, how quickly they jump to conclusions, and how powerful a calm, confident response can be. The crowd continued to buzz with quiet reflection, some nodding to themselves, others exchanging glances with strangers who had witnessed the same moment. Each person seemed to take away something different: respect, admiration, the reminder to question assumptions, or the understanding that true authority is earned through dignity, not just enforced through position. Even the park itself seemed different, quieter yet more aware, as if the trees and pathways had absorbed the lesson. The sunlight filtered through the branches, casting long, thoughtful shadows, and the laughter of children resumed, softer now, as if blending with the understanding that courage is not always loud, and lessons are not always taught with words. And so, as the veteran slowly walked away, leaving the officers and the crowd to reflect on what had occurred, the park remained a place transformed. A single afternoon had become a moment of education, introspection, and revelation, showing that respect can be inspired, courage can be witnessed quietly, and every person carries a story that, if noticed, can change the way the world sees them. By the time she disappeared into the distance, the crowd had been given more than a story. They had been given a lesson in humanity, humility, and the power of patience, dignity, and grace, and the officers, standing silently, would carry the reflection of this encounter with them for a long time, a reminder that their actions, assumptions, and words carry consequences far beyond what they can see. As the veteran walked slowly away from the small gathering, the park seemed to exhale, releasing the tension that had held it captive for so long. The officers watched her go, their earlier confidence replaced by quiet reflection. They understood, perhaps for the first time that day, that respect cannot be demanded, and that courage and dignity often walk quietly among us, unnoticed until they are revealed. The crowd lingered, hesitant to disperse, as if leaving too soon would erase the memory of what they had just witnessed. Conversations sparked in hushed tones, some people speaking directly to each other, others simply whispering to themselves, "I'll never forget that," or, "She taught them a lesson," without even raising her voice. The impact of the encounter extended far beyond the brief moment in which it had occurred, reaching into the hearts and minds of everyone present. A young man who had been sitting on a nearby bench shook his head, still in awe. "It's incredible," he said softly, "how one person can change the energy of a whole place just by being calm and confident." His friend nodded, adding, "And make people rethink everything they thought they knew, about her, about themselves, about respect." Around them, others were nodding, some recording short clips on their phones, realizing that this was more than a viral moment, it was a lesson worth sharing. The officers remained silent for a while, speaking only in low murmurs to each other. Their posture softened, their hands unclenched, and though they did not speak aloud, their expressions revealed an internal shift, an acknowledgement that the rules of authority are meaningless without wisdom, empathy, and understanding. The taller officer, who had spoken first that day, let out a slow breath, the weight of embarrassment and revelation settling over him, while the second officer adjusted his uniform, the stiffness in his shoulders gone but replaced with something heavier, something contemplative. Passers-by began to disperse slowly, carrying with them not just the story of what had happened, but the lesson it had delivered. Each person would remember the veteran, her calm courage, and the moment her hand revealed a life of service, sacrifice, and strength, and in their own way, the story would continue to ripple outwards, touching lives far beyond the park that afternoon. The veteran paused at the edge of the path, looking back one last time, her eyes sweeping over the officers, the crowd, and the park itself. There was no anger in her gaze, no triumph in her smile, only a quiet understanding, a knowledge that she had lived her life with dignity, and today, that dignity had spoken louder than any argument, any confrontation, or any attempt to intimidate. A few people whispered to each other about sharing the story online, about how important it was to recognize that heroism often goes unseen, and that sometimes, all it takes is a calm, composed presence to remind the world of what truly matters. The veteran disappeared into the distance, her figure slowly blending with the sunlight and shadows, leaving behind not just witnesses, but people forever changed by what they had seen. The officers finally looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They had been humbled, and perhaps they had learned something they could not have learned in a training room or from a manual. The encounter had been brief, but the lessons were enduring. Assumptions can be dangerous, respect must be genuine, and courage does not always shout, it often whispers through quiet dignity. The park slowly returned to normal, children laughing, joggers moving along the paths, and the soft hum of city life continuing as if nothing had happened. Yet, beneath the ordinary rhythm of the afternoon, there lingered a subtle difference, a collective memory of a moment where the unexpected revealed truth, and where patience, calmness, and honor had transformed a potentially humiliating encounter into a story that would be told and remembered for years. By the time the veteran disappeared from view entirely, the impact of her presence remained, etched in the minds of everyone who had seen her, a living testament to courage, respect, and the power of maintaining dignity in the face of misunderstanding. And as the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, the memory of that day, of that encounter, and of the lessons learned, would linger far longer than the warmth of the afternoon, a story that reminded everyone present that true strength is quiet, enduring, and impossible to ignore once revealed.